joining us this evening. We are taping tonight, so I'm going to ask, we'll be using the microphone this evening, but you are welcome to come closer if you would like. We have two speakers this evening, and the first is our Deputy Superintendent, Ms. Eileen Schaefer, and she will do a quick introduction focused on the matter at hand, which is the water quality testing going on here in our school district. But then she will introduce our Executive Director of Facilities, Mr. Steve Morlino, who will really be taking us through the meat of the presentation. So without further ado, let me give this over to Ms. Eileen Schaefer.
Thank you, and good evening. Thank you for joining us as well. Tonight, you're going to hear from Steve Morlino, who joined us a couple of years ago and started to put in place a water testing program. It's not a requirement through the state or any other agency, but he came to the district as our executive director and started a water testing program. So you'll hear more about that. It's been going on for the past 2 years. You'll hear specifically about School 27 and what our next steps are. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I'm going to introduce Steve Morlino, who will go through a PowerPoint presentation with you, and if you have any questions, he'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to do a presentation this evening on the water quality testing we've been doing here in the Paterson Public Schools. We started this testing program 2 years ago, and the reason this is all coming to light, I guess, is because there were several issues that brought it into the national spotlight. One of them was Flint, Michigan. There was an issue with them converting their water supply, not necessarily a water problem within any building. It was the supply of water that had changed, the way they were actually treating the water that became problematic and introduced some lead into their water system. Unlike that, in Newark, there was a problem with the internal plumbing in the school buildings themselves, and they got some high readings there in the school buildings. We here in Paterson started our testing 2 years ago in order to get a handle on what was going on here. So we started that testing in September of 2014. The law currently only requires water testing by the municipal water supply. In this case, it's the St. Valley Water Commission that supplies the water to the city of Paterson, including all the schools in the district. So they are charged under federal law to provide an annual report of the water, which they do, and it's mailed to the homeowners with your water bill. The school district has copies of it, and it's posted in schools to let people know what the water supply is. That's the only requirement currently under the law. And there was no problem with the water supply coming into the Paterson, city of Paterson, or into the school district. So what did we do? What we do is a voluntary program. It's not required by anybody. So we did a voluntary water quality check in order to make sure that we're providing the best water we can within the school district itself internally in our schools. So we tested between last year and this year 1,620 water outlets, sinks, faucets, water, food prep areas where the water is in the kitchen, etc. In 2014-15, we tested 850 different water sources, and out of the 850, there were 37 that exceeded 15 parts per billion, which is the threshold at which they recommend action being taken. So there were 37 out of all of those tests that were higher than what the limit was, so we shut those down immediately and began doing repair work on them so that they could be retested and put back into service. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, what was done. This year so far, we've tested 770 water sources, and out of the 770, 48 of them have shown exceedances of the 15 parts per billion. So they were immediately shut down. Before we turn any one of these back on, we test them, we do repair work, we either retrofit the fountain, or we install lead reduction filter, or we take a look at what the source of lead might be. We then do another test before it's put back into service and make sure we're below that 15 parts per billion. This is the sign that's being installed when we go to do the water sampling, because one of the things you must do when you do a water sample is let the water sit in the pipe overnight at a minimum. Okay, so when water sits in a pipe, that's when there's a time for the lead to leach into the water supply. So what we want to do is take that first draw of water prior to anyone turning the water on in the morning. So usually it's done on a Friday evening. We'll post a sign, tell people not to use the fixture. Our schools get very little use over the weekend. Most of them get no use, some of them get a lot of use. So depending on the location, the sign is posted, and then we take the first draw of water in the morning before anybody comes into the school and starts using the water. So this sign is posted until that draw is taken. How do you get lead into your system or into the water supply? So the biggest problem with lead, especially with young children, is hand to mouth, okay? There's ingestion of lead-based paint, okay? The biggest problem we have in this country is lead-based paint. Lead was put into paint prior to 1978, and a lot of our homes were built prior to 1978, and that's where the lead got into the houses. The paint was used, it's a lead in paint gives it a vivid color, and depending on the color you use, it makes paint more flexible, so it tends to adhere better, and it's just, in general, makes the paint last longer. So that's how, and windows were painted, the window runner, where the window goes up and down in the runner, was painted with lead-based paint. So when you ran the window up and down, the older houses had wooden windows, you ran the window up and down, the paint would become pulverized. It's almost like sanding it as that window goes up and down in the window track. And you get a light dust, and children like that dust. When they touch that dust, a lot of children do hand to mouth. It's a sweet tasting taste to it, and children crawl on the floor where there may be dust from the paint getting onto the floor. They crawl on the floor with their hands, and then the hands go from hand to mouth, and that's how you get a lot of it. You can also breathe in dust, lead dust from paint. So as you inhale, and children are close to the floor when they're crawling around, so dust settles. Lead is a heavy metal. Once it pulverized, gets into the air, it settles pretty quickly, gets onto the floor, the rug, the carpet, whatever. Kids walk across it and hand to mouth, and that's how they ingest more of it. There's also an issue with possibility of water containing lead, and that's what we're here to talk about this evening, is the water quality. But I want everyone to understand that more of a problem is actually the lead paint. Imported candies, you ever eat the hard candies you get around Christmas time? They come in a tin. They're nice and shiny looking. Well, they contain lead a lot of times. Foreign countries don't have the standards we have, and unfortunately, some of those products that we import contain lead. Some of the utensils we use, such as nice bright orange plates and bright green plates, and red plates. If you look around, and, sometimes you see these bright colored dishes and cups and things. They typically have a high content of lead. Okay, if you take a lead check swab and you swab some of those things right in the store where you're buying them, you'll see that those things contain lead. So you have to be careful with that, what you're buying, because some of these products contain lead. How about water? How does lead get into water? Well, up until a few years ago, we connected the pipes, copper pipes, in our houses and our schools with lead-based solder. Okay, they heat the joint up, they put solder on it, and the solder goes inside the pipe and outside the pipe, and it joins the pipes together. So when the water runs through the pipe, normally it's not a problem, but if the water sits in the pipe for a length of time, and as the pipes get older and older, you get a little bit of corrosion internally in that pipe, and you get leaching of lead into the water from the solder. Some of the brass and chrome plated fixtures that we use, those nice shiny fixtures, they look very nice, especially water fountains that were in schools. Typically the white ceramic water fountain has a nice bubbler on it and it's chrome plated. Well, the chrome process contains some lead. So when you drink out of that, the potential is there for you to get some lead. So we've been retrofitting those, and we'll talk about those in a bit. Lead pipes and pipe fittings. Many years ago, lead piping was used. Okay, to actually, the pipe was made out of lead. We don't have much of that in our schools. I've actually never seen a lead pipe in our schools. But the infrastructure around the school may have some lead pipe, and older buildings may have lead pipes, and some of your houses may have lead pipes, so you should really check into that. And the standard for the amount of lead in the blood has changed in the last couple of years, so your physician is aware of that. If you have your child checked, they'll know what the standard is at this point. Okay, How does it get into our house? Again, we just talked about that the plumbing fixtures and the plumbing piping, the way they're connected together, potentially allow water in contact with lead and it leaches, and you get that. Now, schools are of particular concern because a lot of times schools aren't used from a Friday to a Monday morning. So the water sits in the pipe from Friday to Monday morning. Some schools get some usage over the weekend, some of them get a lot of usage over the weekend, but the water that sits in the pipes over the weekend is the reason we've implemented a flushing program. We started that a couple of years ago, that we put that into place so that on Monday morning all the chief custodians come in and they flush the water in the school in order to clear out that water that's been sitting in those pipes since Friday night or the day before, depending. And we do that over holidays. So when there's an extended holiday, spring break, etc., when schools aren't in use, other than a few people in there cleaning or security, or other staff doing some maintenance, we have a flushing program that addresses that. Typically, water associated with high blood levels is not really the concern. It's, again, that lead paint that causes that problem. But when you combine a couple different sources, whether it's the lead in the water, some candy you may be eating, and the lead paint problem, you could have elevated levels, so you should see your physician if you have those concerns. Corrosion in the pipes and the leaching of lead into the water is caused by several different factors, okay? The softness of the water, the alkalinity of the water has an impact on the water. So if you have a water softener at home, you're more likely to have lead in your water. So you should really flush the water, or you should have a filter on the water source where you actually drink the water, whether it's in the kitchen or the refrigerator should have a filter on it that reduces lead. The pH of the water, that's the acidity of the water or the alkalinity of the water, has an impact on the amount of lead that could leach into the pipe, so you have into the water. So 7 is neutral. If it's from below 7, it's acidic. If it's above 7, it's caustic, and it can have an impact on how much lead leaches into the water. The water velocity, how much water runs through your pipe and at how many feet per minute or how many gallons per minute go through the pipe also impacts it. If the water just trickles out, there's more of a chance that lead could leach into it because there's not enough force or pressure in order to push the lead out of the pipe. So if you have a good running faucet and a lot of water comes out of it real quick, that's something that's actually good. Temperature of the water is very important. You should never use hot water to prepare food or coffee. Some people think, well, I'll put hot water in the coffee pot and put it on the stove and it heats up faster. That may be the case. However, the hot water tends to take more lead out of the water supply system or the piping system. So you don't want to use hot water to either defrost food or to prepare food or prepare coffee. The alkalinity, we just talked about, the pH factor, whether it's high or low, has an impact on the amount of water and lead leaching. The chlorine level. A lot of times the chlorine is a disinfectant that's used by the water supplier to disinfect the water and ensure that it's safe from bacteria. Depending on how much chlorine is infused into the water is dependent on the water supply itself. If there's a storm in a recent time period, they may use more disinfectant because the water is flowing from different areas into the reservoir or the water source itself. Certainly the age of the plumbing is a problem, okay, depending on how old the plumbing is. The older plumbing tends to have more lead joints, and solder changed over the years. It was 50-50, 60-40, 95-5. There's a different mixtures of lead in with the tin in solder, so that impacts it. And the biggest factor is the amount of time the water sits in contact with the lead joints in the pipe. Also, there's an issue with electrical grounding, okay? All of our homes contain electric. The electric system is grounded and bonded so that if a lightning strike occurs, or just for the general use of electric, how it flows through your house, it's bonded together to the water piping in your home. You need to make sure those joints and connections are tight. If not, you can get what's called electrolysis taking place. The piping will turn color, and you'll cause some corrosion on those lead joints, and you'll get more lead into the water than if the ground was in good shape. The Board of Health here in the state's been working diligently on lowering the statistics insofar as lead in the bloodstream, okay? We are one of 17 states that we check children in the 1 and 2 year age range for lead in the blood, okay? So there's a big screening program going on. 205,000 children were screened for lead in 2014 by the state of New Jersey. The number of children with elevated blood levels has dropped significantly in the last 20 years because some of the promotional and educational programs that have taken place, and HUD has been very involved with reducing lead in windows, especially in public housing. There's been a lot of money spent on replacing old windows. So out of 27,295 cases of elevated blood levels in 2000, it dropped to 3,400 in 2014, and that's a significant reduction. And that's a nice story. That it'd be nice if it was zero, but there's certainly been a tremendous improvement because of the programs that are in place. Why is New Jersey concerned about lead in the water? Well, one of the reasons is a lot of our houses, 1 out of 3, was built before 1978. And what is 1978? Why is that important? That's the year they took lead out of paint. Okay. So paint no longer contains lead after 1978, unless there were some paint sitting around on the shelf in the hardware store. They were allowed to sell it, but they weren't allowed to manufacture it with lead after 1978. The only paint that still contains lead today are the yellow lines painted on the streets, and the underpasses and bridges still contain lead in the paint because of the longevity of the paint, the flexibility of the paint, and the fact that it lasts a lot longer when it contains lead. So the yellow lines would wear out quicker if they didn't contain lead, so they allow them to put lead in that paint. If you have an older home built before 1978, most likely under the existing latex paint, there is some lead-based paint. Okay, so you may have painted over, or the previous owner of the home or renter may have painted over the lead, and you may not see the lead and it may not be visible, but if you do any kind of renovation or if the paint starts to peel, you need to make sure you check for lead paint. The source of lead paint, especially if you have children in under 6 years old, you should really check your house for lead paint issues. So if you're a renter, there are certain things that the federal government and the state require, and these were laws that were passed in 1978, require the landlord to provide documentation to you, pamphlets to you when you sign a lease, explaining to you what the lead reduction rules are. They need to explain to you any renovation work that they've done, any testing they've done, any kind of documents they have in regard to lead usage in the building that you're renting or leasing. So there's inserts they're supposed to give you, and if you have any questions about that, you can ask your landlord to give you a lead hazard inspection report, and they're required by law to provide that to you. So when you sign that lease, you should ask those questions, be an informed renter. Lead poisoning usually affects children 6 to 29 months old, and again, that's the range in which they're crawling around and they're doing a lot of hand-to-mouth work ups with as they play and as they roam around the house and explore. That's what they're doing. So sometimes that doesn't become recognized until the child goes to school, and once they're in school and the teaching staff, the pedagogical staff starts working with them, they start to come to light that there may be some issues such as hyperactivity, aggression, attention deficit disorder, decreased hand-eye coordination, all of those kinds of things sometimes are recognized by school personnel, and then they'll refer that to the parent or to the physician in the school or the nurse to take follow-up action and inform the parent of that. Recently, the Paterson Public Schools trained 15 people in addition to myself and Ms. Zemo, who's the health and safety officer for the district. So we now have 15 additional people trained in lead and how to handle lead and what to do when lead is discovered in our schools. So we have 15 extra hands and eyes out there looking at this, so it's less dependent on 2 people, and there's more, at this point, much more knowledge out there on what lead is all about and what we need to be concerned with. And we train painters, we train carpenters, we train plumbers, and electricians, and HVAC people, because all in the day's work, they come in contact with lead, they drill holes in walls, they work with piping and various other building materials in our schools, so it's important for them to be knowledgeable in lead, and so we had them certified. And I'm glad to say all 15 of them passed. This is one of the companies that we hired. It's an environmental company that's licensed and certified to do things such as lead water quality testing, asbestos testing, etc. As you can see on the date there is November of 2014. That's about when we got this program under full gear and operation. And this type of report was given at every school and every sample. There's a chain of custody that takes place. There's a lead analysis that's done, and we get a reading and the results of the reading in parts per billion. And 15 parts per billion is the threshold at which you should take action. It's recommended by the DEP and the EPA. We do retesting. When we get a high reading, if you look at that chart, you'll see somewhere at 70 parts, and then they retested after we did some work, and it came down to 7.4. One of them did not come down low enough, so it was to be determined when that would be turned back on. But we didn't turn these things back on until the test came in below 15. This is the chain of custody. So again, there's a form that's filled out, and the people that take the sample, are trained and certified. We don't leave this up to the custodian or anybody in the school that's not trained. This is done by trained personnel, and people ask me, well, why does it take so long to do this testing? Again, we go back to each fixture has to be the first draw of water in the morning, and the lab can only send 3 or 4 people at a time to work in our district, so it takes a little while to do all of this testing. Every water fountain is labeled WF with a number, and every sink is labeled SF with a number. And that way the sampler, when they come back year after year, if it's not the same person, can identify the fixture in which water sampling was taken the previous year, and we do comparisons. So if the reading comes in above 15 parts per billion, what we do is we post a sign on it, we shut the water off, and we take remedial action. So the fixture is turned off immediately. In most cases, the valve is shut tight. We remove the valve wheel so you can't just turn it back on inadvertently, and we sometimes cover it with plastic and put a sign up that says, do not drink this water. Sometimes the manufacturer in the past actually used lead in water fountains and fixtures, okay? They manufacture, especially some of the chilled water fountains, the ones that have that nice cold water in them. Well, these particular models that you see here actually contain lead in the tank, okay, in the tank in the chilled water section. These are other manufacturers that this is published on the Consumer Product Safety Commission's website, and it lists a bunch of water fixtures known to contain lead. We've cross-referenced those and removed any fixtures in the district that were on that list. Okay, and that was an important step that we took to take them out of service. What else have we done? We've installed lead reduction filters wherever we got readings that were high and they weren't able to be easily brought down with modification to the actual plumbing. We've installed fixtures. Some of them, such as this one, is on an entire water line, so that everything beyond that filter is filtered water, lead reduction, especially if it feeds multiple floors or multiple water fountains. Same thing with this one. So you won't see the filters in some of the schools because they're done in the basement, out of sight, but they're not out of mind. We've installed these filters. We have a preventative maintenance program that's an electronic program. We entered the data for these filters into that program, and a work order is going to be generated every 4 to 6 months, depending on that type of filter and the flow rate through the filter, to remind us to go change that filter cartridge, because they have to be maintained. You can't put filters in and not maintain them. Other fountains, the fixture wasn't conducive to this type of filter installation, so the filter is actually under the water fountain, and that's how that was installed, so you'll see the filters. We're using clear housings, so you can actually see into the filter housing and see the cartridge. And some of the filters we're currently buying actually change color when they need to be changed. We're also retrofitting a lot of the fountains. So if you still see an old fountain in the school that was built 50 years ago, the parts, internal and the bubbler, which is the little chrome piece that you push the handle on and the water comes out of, and some kids put their mouth right on it because the water pressure's not right, or they just like to drink that way. We've changed those fixtures. We've retrofitted them with lead-free products so that they no longer contain any lead. We're looking at hydration stations such as this, where you can put a bottle right under it. You have a bubbler here also. That's one of the methods to go forward on how we're going to do the corrective action on some of this stuff once we see what the state's coming up with. But these have built-in filters so that we don't have to install them separately, and that's the nice part of that. It's easier to maintain. At the new PS16, which is hopefully going to open in September, we actually installed these types of fixtures. So there's a hydration station in there. It's also got a bubbler on it, and it's got a filtration system built right into those new water fountains. We're looking at several other ways to do this with reverse osmosis filtration systems, and the jury's still out on what we're going to settle on eventually. Where we haven't tested water, such as in janitor's closets or places where normally no one is going to drink the water, if you've seen some of our janitor closets, I don't think you take a drink of water out of them. That's where we fill the buckets, and that's where we mix the cleaning chemicals and things, so not too many people are drinking that water, we hope, but to prevent that, we're putting labels on those particular fixtures, those out-of-the-way sinks in the boiler room and in other areas in our buildings where the water is not used for drinking purposes, and in some cases, the water is never turned on. But we're putting a sign on there with that universal symbol on there that says, "Do not drink the water." Dr. Evans had put out a notice to all parents indicating that we were proceeding with this testing on a voluntary basis throughout the school district, and letting everyone know that the water in their school's been tested and the water quality reports are available through your principal's office. Ms. Corallo is posting it on the website. You'll be able to go on the website and see the readings for your particular school if that interests you. So that is all going to be, it's public information. Some people say, well, isn't the water as bad as it was in Flint, Michigan? No, it's not as bad as Flint, Michigan. That was a whole different scenario in Flint, Michigan, the way they changed the water source and the treatment of the water. And their readings were in the 13,000 range and actually even higher since this slide was put together. Here in Paterson, we had 722 fixtures that were tested below the 15 parts per billion, well within the range. Most of them in that area tested either at below 3 or below 2 parts per billion. So there's the readings for all of the sinks and the fountains and in the district, and it tells you the range of the readings. And as you can see, most of the readings that were in the higher range were very limited, and most of those were at locations such as a sink. The last one there was at a sink that hadn't been turned on in quite a while. People say, what's 15 parts per billion? What's that look like? That's terrible that I should drink 15 parts per billion, or my child should drink it. 15 parts per billion is equivalent to that 1 drop of water to that tanker truck full of water. So if you had 15 drops of water and 15 of those tanker trucks, that's what it's equivalent to. Or you can say it's 1 blade of grass on an entire football field. Or it's 1 penny in $1 million. Or it's 1 second every 32 years. So it's quite a small quantity. Is it acceptable? I don't think any amount of lead is acceptable, but that's the range that's acceptable and the action level. So at some point we hope to get below that, and well below it, and like I said, most of ours are below 3, the readings. Is this a problem just in Paterson or Newark or in Flint, Michigan? No, absolutely not. This is a problem. New York Times article says it's a nationwide problem. It's across the country. The more they test, the more they find that this is a problem nationwide. So in Jersey City, they tested a building, happened to be 98 years old. Our average age here in Paterson is 80 years old of our schools, not me, it's the schools. So this building's 98 years old. 16 out of the 19 fixtures that were tested had readings above 15 parts per billion. So that's of concern, and that's why you'll see in a minute what the governor's doing about it. Los Angeles Unified School District, that's the 2nd largest school district in the country, spent almost $20 million allocated to replace water fountains in their schools. Okay. Governor Christie just this week announced that he's going to start mandating that testing be done for lead in the water in all the schools in New Jersey. Back in April, he said, well, he didn't think it was necessary, but he's been convinced and he's changed his mind. He's now pushing for water testing in every school, charter school, public school in the state, starting next school year. Okay, so we're going to be 2 years ahead of the governor's program. Hopefully he'll reimburse us for the money we spent testing the water for the last 2 years. So Governor Christie announced that he's earmarking $10 million for water testing. He hasn't said what he's going to do once the readings come in and they need to remediate it. There's been discussion about using bottled water, but I really don't think that's the solution. So he's proposing we test 3,000 public schools. The state legislature, the assembly, has got a bill posted to test the water annually. The Senate posted a bill to check the water twice annually. in September and then 6 months later. I'm not sure which bill is going to actually pass at the end of the day, but again, we're already testing here in Paterson. So I hope I've answered some of your questions, and I'd be glad to take any questions that you might have in this regard this evening. Must have been something I said I lost in the audience. Frank, you got a question?
I just want to thank you. It's very informative in terms of my own edification and knowledge. And I appreciate what's been done here at 27. And just thank you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. And again, this comes from Dr. Evans and Ms. Schaefer right from the top, that we test the water, we earmark money to do this, even though the district's strapped for funds. This is an important thing, and the money's been allocated to do this testing and remediation. And Dr. Prasad is here from the health department in the city of Paterson, listening to us, and his office can offer some testing if any parent needs it and doesn't have the resources such as private insurance, etc., to pay for it. He can help them through that water to get that tested. You have anything you want to add, Doctor?
No, you did a great job.
Thank you. All right, with that, that concludes our program. I thank you for